Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new revision lecture series for Class 12th Boards 2021, and we will be discussing the biology section here, and we will be starting with the unit of ecology. So let's start with the unit of ecology. Now if you look at the chapters which we have to cover in this particular unit, we are basically having two chapters. Chapter number 1 is organisms and population, and chapter number 2 is biodiversity and conservation. The chapters ecosystem and environmental issues stand deleted as per the 2021 syllabus. So let us start with the CBSE syllabus. First of all, let us understand what is the syllabus and what are the topics that we have to cover in both these chapters. So in the first chapter, that is organisms and population, we have to discuss about the concept of habitat and niche. Also, we have to discuss about adaptations and population interactions and certain attributes of population such as growth rate, birth rate, death rate, etc. So this is an easy chapter, though it's a lengthy chapter. The second chapter is biodiversity and conservation, which is a small chapter, and it basically deals with the concept, patterns and importance of biodiversity, and also the loss of biodiversity and conservation of biodiversity. So let us start with the first chapter here, that is organisms and population. Being a lengthy chapter, we will be covering this in 5 parts. In part 1, we will be discussing half of the portion of organisms. Part 2, we will be discussing the rest half of the same topic, that is organisms. In part 3, we will be discussing about the population attributes. Part 4, we will be discussing about population growth. And the last part, we will be discussing about the population interactions. So let us start with the first part. Before that, let us see the chapter outline. This chapter is broadly having 3 topics. The first topic is organisms, second is population, and the third is population interactions. So this is the lecture 1, where we'll be discussing about the basics of ecology, about physiological ecology, habitat and niche, and the major abiotic factors. Only 4 topics we'll be discussing in today's lecture. So let us start with what is ecology. So what exactly is ecology? Ecology is basically a subject. It is a sub-branch of biology which deals with the studies of interaction between organisms. So it can be an interaction between one organism and another organism which is belonging to the same species, or it could be between an organism and another organism of a different species, or it could be between an organism and its physical environment. Physical environment is the environment in which that particular organism lives. That is known as the abiotic environment. So ecology is basically the study of interactions. So these interactions can be between two organisms of the same species, that is known as intraspecific interactions, or it can be the interaction between one organism of one species with another organism of different species, that is known as interspecific interactions. And the third one is the relation between an organism and its surrounding environment. Now, next important point is that ecology is basically concerned with 4 levels of biological organization. So let us understand what are these 4 levels. The first one, the basic level, is that of organisms. Second one is population. Third is biological communities, and the last is biomes. So ecology is having 4 basic levels. The first one is the organismic level, second is the population level, third is the community level, and the fourth is the biome level. Now if we study ecology at the organismic level, then it is known as horticology. Horticology. And if we are studying at the community level, then it is known as sign ecology. SYN ecology, sign ecology. And if you're studying it in terms of population, then it is known as demography, and at biomes level it is known as biodiversity, which we will be discussing in the upcoming chapter. Now let us start with ecological hierarchy. Ecological hierarchy is basically the levels of arrangement of ecological factors. So if we start from the basic level, The first level, as you can see over here, is the individual, where a single organism is involved. Next, a group of linked, or we can say related organisms, they comes under a higher level of ecology, which is known as population. A little more higher level is known as the community, and then comes the ecosystem, which is forming the biome. But as per NCRT, we have only four levels: individual, population, community, and biome. Ecosystem, biosphere, biome is aggregated to form as biome. So in our syllabus, we have to study only four levels: individual, population, community, and biome. So let's start with the first topic of this chapter, that is dealing with physiological ecology. First of all, let us understand what does this word mean. What does physiological ecology mean? Ecology at organismic level is also known as physiological ecology. So what is physiological ecology? It is ecology learned at organismic level, and it tries to understand many things. What are those many things? First thing is how the different organisms are adapted to their environments, and this adaptation can be in terms of survival and also in terms of reproduction. So physiological ecology is having one main motive. And what is that main motive? It is to understand how different organisms are adapted to their environment in terms of their survival as well as in terms of their reproduction. So we are going to we're going a little bit deeper into the topic of physiological ecology. So first of all, you can see a beautiful landscape over here, right? So whenever we are seeing such landscapes, one question can come in our mind. That is, how did the various landscapes formed? So to answer this question, we have to put forward two arguments. So let us see what are those arguments. Argument number one is related to Earth. We know that Earth rotates around itself, that is known as rotation, and also it revolves around Sun. So our Earth can show rotation on its own axis, and also it can revolve around the Sun. So this rotation and revolution has resulted in the formation of distinct seasons. Why is it leading to different seasons? Is because there are annual variations that is happening in the intensity as well as in the duration of temperature. So due to this variation in the intensity and duration of temperature, there is formation of distinct seasons. So this is how we can see different seasons. So this is the first argument, how landscapes are formed. But the argument does not end over here. So let us see the second argument. The second argument that is put forward is these variations, along with there is an annual variation in terms of precipitation as well. So there is a variation in the temperature that is due to the tilt of Earth around its own axis and also due to the revolution around the Sun. And along with that, there is also an annual variation in the precipitation. Now this annual variation in precipitation can be in terms of rain and also in terms of snow. So both of these account for the formation of major biomes. So the precipitation can either be rain or it could be snow. Both of these can result in the formation of different types of biomes, such as the desert, or it can be a rainforest, or it can be a tundra. So all these are the different landscapes. These are just some of the landscapes that can be present on Earth, and like that, large number of landscapes are formed, and these landscapes are formed due to these two reasons: the annual variation in the temperature and also annual variation in the precipitation. So temperature and precipitation are equally important for the formation of various landscapes. Now let us see a picture from NCRT. This picture is showing a graph which is depicting the biome distribution with respect to the annual temperature and precipitation. So let us understand this particular graph. But before that, I will show you a table which is showing the mean annual temperature and the mean annual rainfall. And now let us bring up the graph back and understand what does this graph exactly mean. What are the possible questions that we can get from here? So here we can see on the x-axis, this is the x-axis. So along the x-axis we can see mean annual precipitation, and along the y-axis here we can see the mean annual temperature. So if I am seeing the precipitation scale, we can see it is in terms of centimeter, 50, 100, 150 like that it is given. So if I am looking the habitat which is having maximum rainfall, I can see that tropical rainforests get a maximum of nearly 425 to 450 range of rainfall, and the minimum is nearly around 175 something, or 150 to 200. That is the minimum range of rainfall for tropical forest. So we can also see that the temperature is highest over here. The temperature is lying something between 20 to 25, the mean annual temperature. We are considering all the seasons throughout the year, and when we are taking the average, it is coming out to be 20 to 25. So we can see that the mean annual temperature is 20 to 25, that is high, and also we can see that the precipitation in the tropical forest is high. So the characteristic that is associated with the tropical forest is that it is having high mean annual precipitation and also high mean annual temperature. Whereas if I take another example of the Arctic and the alpine tundra, I can see that the temperature lies below zero. Just above zero we can see at some zones, but usually it is below zero, usually in the range of -12 to 2 degrees Celsius. This is the range of temperature for Arctic as well as alpine tundra, and the precipitation that is also less in this particular habitat. So the precipitation is less and the temperature is also less in Arctic and alpine tundra. Whereas if we see coniferous forest, in the case of coniferous forest, the rainfall is in the range of 75 to 250, and also we can see the temperature ranges between 0 to 15. So the winters are extremely cold and the summers are moderately hot. That is the meaning of temperature lying between 0 to 15. So for coniferous forest we can see a moderate amount of rainfall and a moderate range of temperature. On the other hand, in the case of desert, we can see that the rainfall is very less. On the other hand, the temperature is maximum, nearly in the range of 20 to 25. Now, if we take the temperate forest is having lesser rainfall as compared to the coniferous forest, but it is having higher temperature as compared to the coniferous forest. And the last one is grassland. Grassland is having high temperature and is having less rainfall, but compared to desert it is having slightly greater amount of rainfall. So this is what we can infer from this particular graph, and the identification of the various landscapes are important from this particular graph. One time question have came from this for the board examination regarding the identification of which is the habitat. Same type of questions we can expect for the entrance as well. So let us start with the next topic now. The next topic is known as, before that we have to see what is the various habitats, or we can see what are the various biomes that are present in Earth. So we know that annual precipitation as well as annual temperature that varies from place to place. That is why we have different kinds of habitats present in our country. The temperature in India is not constant throughout. Similarly, the rainfall in our country is not uniform throughout. So this variation in the rainfall as well as temperature is responsible for the formation of a large number of habitats ranging from the plains to the hills, and we also have the coastal areas and many other biomes. So we have a picture which is mentioned in NCERT showing the major biomes, but before that we have to understand that habitat does not mean favorable. We have some exceptions which are extremes and extremely harsh. So those conditions can also act as a habitat, at least for some organisms. So let me just introduce you to some harsh habitats where some organisms live. The first one, we can take the example of the scorching Rajasthan desert. The temperature is extremely high, greater than 50 degrees Celsius. So in that particular condition also organisms exist. Another example for harsh habitat is the rain-soaked Meghalaya forest, where every time there is extremely high rain. Now another is the deep ocean trenches, which is something like this. And the next one is the torrential streams, where there is extreme flow of river and any other water bodies. Another example for a harsh habitat is the permafrost polar regions, which is associated with the snow mountains, snow ice caps and all. And the next one is the high mountain tops, where the temperature is very less. Another one can be the thermal springs, where only archaebacteria can survive. And another one, we can take the example of the stinking compost pit, where a large number of decomposer bacteria can survive. And of course, our intestine as well, it can be a home to a large number of bacteria such as the lactobacillus, etc. So these are some of the harsh habitats, and now this picture shows the major biomes of India. The first one is the tropical rainforest. This one is the tropical rainforest, and tropical rainforest is mainly seen in the southern states of Kerala, Karnataka, Maharashtra, and also in some of the northeastern states. Coming to the second one, the deciduous forest, which is mainly seen in Meghalaya and Assam. The third one is the desert, the hot desert, which is seen in Rajasthan, and the cold desert, which is seen in Jammu and Kashmir. And the last one is sea coast, and the areas which are famous for sea coast includes Kerala, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra and Odisha. These are the areas with maximum amount of coastal areas. So these are some of the biomes of India. Only some are mentioned, and also we have the ice caps and many other like the estuaries. All these are different types of biomes which are present in India. So now let us see what are the most essential elements or the key elements that have led to the variation in the physical and chemical conditions of the different habitats. What is the reason for these diverse habitats which are present in our Earth? This diversification is mainly due to two categories of components. The first category is known as abiotic components, which are non-living components such as temperature, water, light, and soil. And the next one is known as biotic components, which includes pathogens, parasites, predators, and competitors, about which we will discuss in detail in the last part of this chapter. And these organisms, that is parasites, pathogens, predators and competitors, they interact with each other constantly, and also they interact with the abiotic components, and this interaction is extremely important for the variation in the physical and chemical conditions. This brings us to the concept of ecological niche. So what is ecological niche? What happens is that due to passage of time, there is the survival of fittest, right? So according to the Darwinian theory, what happens is that there is natural selection that is operating in the nature. Now, as a result of natural selection, every organism tries to be the best one in the surrounding. So due to this, what happens is that that particular organism will evolve some sort of an adaptations. So due to period of time, as a result of natural selection, that particular organism get adapted to that particular condition. And now this particular organism is fit to live in that particular habitat, and as a result of which it can optimize its survival. So this adaptation is extremely important because it helps to optimize its survival and reproduction in this habitat. So once it get adapted and fit to this particular environment, now this organism can have a distinct functional role in the ecological system. So every living organism can have its own functional role in the ecological system once it has become fit in the environment. And this functional role that is played by an organism in the ecological system is known as niche. So this is a Neet exam question and also a board exam question. They can directly ask the definition of niche. What is niche? Niche is the functional role of an organism in the ecological systems, and this specialization is due to natural selection and obtaining a adaptive feature. So to understand the concept of niche, here is an example of the most famous game, that is Angry Birds. So here we can see three birds. One is a blue bird, another is a red bird, and another is a yellow bird. So here we have a tree. So this tree, complete tree, is known as a fundamental niche. This fundamental niche have certain parts. So let us call it as A, part B, and part C. So this A, B, and C are the separate realized niche. Now these regions A, B and C are present at certain elevations, right? The height at which this A is present is different from the height at which B is present and the height at which C is present. So we can see that the realized niche is having specific elevations. The yellow bird finds to be maximum fit when it is present at this top branches, whereas the red bird finds itself fit to be in the middle range, in the middle boss of the tree, whereas the blue bird finds to be maximum, we can say fittest, in the lowermost boss of the tree. So now what happens is that the yellow bird is fit in the first region, that is in the C region, so it will specialize over there, and now the niche that is formed is due to the yellow bird. Similarly, the niche that is formed at B is due to this red bird, and the niche that is formed at A is due to the blue bird. So different organisms can have its own realized niche, but a single fundamental niche can have many different organisms, and it has many different realized niches present in it. So this is known as niche specialization. Specialization of a particular niche by a particular organism is known as niche specialization. So these are some of the basic things that we have to know regarding ecological niche. The most important one is the definition of the ecological niche that is mostly asked in the exams. So now let's move on to the next topic of this chapter, that is the major abiotic factors. So here we will be discussing about 4 factors. The first one is going to be temperature. Temperature is the first factor. Second one is going to be water. Third one is going to be soil. And the last one is going to be light. So these are the 4 important abiotic factors which are extremely important for the sustenance of every living organism. So let us start with the very first one, that is the temperature. So temperature is the most important ecologically relevant environmental factor. So this is important. We can get direct MCQs from here. Which is the most important or ecologically relevant environmental factor? The answer should be temperature. Now, what is the significance of temperature and what is the variation of temperature? So first let us understand the variation of temperature. Now if I make a flow chart to understand this topic of variation of temperature, variation in temperature is mainly due to variation in seasons, or it could be due to altitude, it could be due to latitude. So these are some of the reasons for variation in temperature. Main reasons are due to seasonal variations, which is due to rotation and revolution of Earth. Next one is altitude. Altitude is inversely proportional to temperature. That means when we move from the plains to hills, the temperature decreases. Similarly, latitude. At equator, the temperature is high, and at the poles, the temperature is low. So this is the important flowchart that you have to remember. Temperature variation can be mainly due to 3 reasons. It can be due to season, it can be due to altitude, or due to latitude. Seasonal variation is due to the rotation and revolution of Earth. Altitude variation can be seen when we move from plains to the hills, the temperature decreases, and latitudinal variation can be explained by the fact that the temperature is high at the equator and low at the poles. So here we can see the lines from NCERT. Average temperature on land varies seasonally, decreases progressively from equator towards the pole, and from the plains to the mountain tops. So we know that Earth always rotates around its own axis, and the top edge and the bottom edge, these are the poles. On one side we have the Arctic pole, and another side we have the Antarctic pole, and in the middle line is known as equator. So when we move from the equator towards the pole, the temperature will decreases. And another case is if we take a plain region and a mountain region, what happens is that when we move from the plain to the hills, the temperature will decrease. Like if I take the example of Alapi, which is the place at the lowest altitude in India, to Kanchenjunga in Jammu Kashmir, which is the place with highest altitude, the temperature will decreases from nearly 25 degrees Celsius on average from Alleppey to 0 to minus 5 degrees Celsius in the Kanchenjunga, or even lesser than that. The annual variation is what I have told to you now. Now let us see another case of variation in the temperature that is seen in the polar regions and the desert regions. In the polar regions, what happens is that the temperature is in the sub-zero levels. Whereas if we take the case of tropical deserts, the temperature exceeds greater than 50 degrees Celsius. So this is another variation of temperature that we can observe. And of course, we have some exceptional cases here also, like the thermal springs and the deep sea hydrothermal vents, where the average temperature it exceeds 100 degrees Celsius. It's not 1000, it should be 100 degree Celsius. It should be 100 degree Celsius. So let us see the next important point, that is the importance of temperature in the life of an individual organism. Temperature is having an extreme significance because it affects the kinetics of enzymes, and we know that enzymes are important for every metabolic activity. So if enzymes are absent, or if enzymes are not working properly, then the metabolism of the person is hampered, and this is extremely critical because it can have adverse effects on the functioning of the various systems of the body. So if we plot a graph between temperature and enzyme action, it looks something like this. So here we can see the optimum temperature, something over here. This is the optimum temperature. Let us take it as T. So below this particular temperature, we can see this is the optimum temperature T, and here we have taken the enzyme action. This is enzyme action, and here there is a temperature. So let us take this as T naught. T naught, that is the optimum activity. So when we take the temperature lesser than the optimum activity, we can see that the enzyme remains inactive. That means the efficiency of the enzyme is lesser. And if it is increased, if it is higher than the optimum temperature, then it becomes denaturated. So it is extremely important that the enzyme should function at the optimum temperature. So optimum temperature should be maintained for any enzyme to function. Another important thing that we have to note regarding temperature is that thermal tolerance of the organisms. The thermal tolerance of different organisms, they determine their geographical distribution. That means if we have a group of organisms which is capable of, we can say, tolerating the colder conditions, then those organisms number will be higher in the colder conditions as compared to the hotter conditions. Suppose if I have an organism A, a group of organisms A, if they are fit to be in the colder conditions, they are extremely fit to be in the colder conditions than in the hotter conditions, then what will happen is that their number, the number of species in that particular group is going to be higher in the colder conditions, and it is going to be lesser in the hotter conditions. So we can say that the levels of thermal tolerance of different species, they determine the geographical distribution. So thermal tolerance is the most important factor that determines the distribution, the geographical distribution of that particular species. Now, let us take the classification of organisms on the basis of their thermal tolerance. Organisms are classified into two categories. One is known as euthermal organisms, which are like happy to live in any conditions. Now, why are they happy? They are happy because they can tolerate and thrive in a wide range of temperature. So they are always okay to be in any of the harsh conditions. If the conditions is harsh, if the temperature is very high, then these organisms can sweat, and as a result of which it can reduce the temperature. Similarly, if the temperature is lesser, then it can shiver, and shivering is an exercise which generates heat, and this heat is used to warm up the organism. So we can say that in the case of euthermal organisms, they should be mostly warm-blooded organisms, because warm-blooded organisms shows homeostasis, and because of homeostasis they can regulate the temperature also, and this ability is responsible for their euthermal nature. That means they can tolerate a range of temperature. So the examples for euthermal organisms includes mammals and birds. On the other hand, in the case of stenothermal organism, the word steno means narrow. Word steno means narrow. So these are narrow range organisms. They can restrict or they can live only to a narrow range of temperature. That means if they are living at 25 degrees Celsius, they will die at 30 degrees Celsius. This is the scenario. Examples includes polar bear. If I bring a polar bear to India, then it will die. Reason, it is a stenothermal organism. Similarly, we can see salmon fish. Salmon fish is another example for stenothermal organism. Similarly, if I take a plant like the mango, mango grows in India because it is a tropical country. Whereas if I take the mango to Canada, it cannot grow because there it is temperate conditions. So all these are stenothermal organisms. That is why it cannot survive in those conditions. So with this, we have completed the first topic, that is temperature. Now, one of the major worries that is troubling the complete human population or the complete global population of every species is the increase in the temperature. There has been an increase in the average global temperature by nearly 1 to 1.5 degrees Celsius over the past 20 years. And this is extremely critical because it can result in the extinction of certain species as well, especially the stenothermal species. So it's extremely important that we should control this present rate of global warming. So with this message, let us move on to the second abiotic factor. So you can easily guess from the animation that you can see that the next factor is going to be water. So water is another most important ecological factor that is influencing the life of organism. So how much importance is this water having? That can be explained from the fact that the first living organism on earth that was found in water. So we can say that life is unsustainable without water. So water is extremely important. The first organism that was formed on earth that was formed in water itself. Now, what is most important when we talk about water? Water is extremely important for every living organism. But what matters is the quantity of water as well as the quality of water. Now, quantity of water is extremely important in the case of terrestrial organisms, and in the case of aquatic organisms, the quality is important. Now, quality of water can be in terms of C, P, or S. Now, what is this CPS? C stands for chemical composition, P stands for pH, and S stands for salinity. So, the quality of water is important for aquatic organisms, and this quality can be in terms of the chemical composition, it can be in terms of the pH, or it can be in terms of the salinity. So, let us understand what is the significance of the quantity and quality of water in different organisms one by one. So first, let us take the case of terrestrial organisms. So in the case of terrestrial organisms, what happens is that the quantity of water is limited. So the availability of water is the major concern for these organisms, especially the plants. So they have made their own special adaptations if water is not present in excess, so that they can live in those extremities also, like the opuntia, also known as the cactus plant, that have many modifications, like the leaves are having spines. So leaves are converted into spines so that the transpiratory losses can be reduced. Similarly, the surface area is reduced so that evaporation is reduced. Similarly, the stems, they can store water, and also the root system is widespread so that maximum water can be collected. So all these are different modifications to thrive under the unfavorable conditions as well. And of course, the productivity and distribution of plants, every plant on earth is dependent only and only on water. And especially in the case of bryophytes and pteridophytes, we have seen in the chapter of plant kingdom that water is extremely essential, because without water the reproduction in those organisms is not possible. Now, in the case of aquatic organism, as I have already told, the quality is important, and quality can be in terms of chemical composition, pH, or it can be in terms of salinity. So here we can see a pie chart which is showing the chemical composition of the different elements in water. So if it is lesser or greater, what can happen is that it can affect the aquatic organisms which are living in that particular water body, and it can also result in the death of certain organisms. Now, based on salinity. Salinity is another important factor that determines the quality of water. So some organisms can tolerate a wide range of salinities. They are known as euryhaline organisms, whereas some other organisms are restricted to a narrow range of salinity. Those organisms are known as stenohaline organisms. So here you can see a table. This is a table based on the data which is given in NCRT. So this particular table shows what is the salinity of the different water bodies, which is measured in terms of parts per thousand. So here we can see in the case of inland water bodies, the salinity is less than 5, very less salinity. Whereas in the case of sea, it is between 30 to 35, and in the case of hypersaline lagoons, the salinity is greater than 100, extremely saline conditions. So these values are important. Now, this is a very important question. We can get a HOTS question from here for the board examination. They can give reason type of question from here. So you have to understand that if we are taking a freshwater organism into sea, or if we take a seawater organism and put it into freshwater, what is going to happen? This question is a most famous question. So let us analyze this scenario. Now, you might have studied in the previous chapters or in the previous smaller classes about the concept of osmosis. Osmosis can be of two types. One is known as endosmosis and another is known as exosmosis. So what is endosmosis? If this is the cell and I'm going to keep it in a medium, what happens is that water will move into the cell. Why is it moving into the cell? Because the concentration of water in the surrounding medium is high. Since the concentration of water in the surrounding medium is high, it will rushes into the cell and it causes the swelling of the cell. This is known as endosmosis. In the case of exosmosis, what happens is that the surrounding medium is having lesser quantity of water and more quantity of salts. So what happens is that from the cell, the water will move towards the medium, and as a result of which the cell will shrink. So in exosmosis, there is shrinking of the cell, and in endosmosis there is swelling of the cell. So this is the basics of osmosis. So using this, let us understand what is the scenario in the case of freshwater and seawater organisms. In sea, we have to understand that in sea, the concentration of the solute is more, or we can say the concentration of ions, say sodium chloride, is more, and water is going to be less. So what happens in the case of a fish that is present in sea? Here the NaCl is more in water, so NaCl will be less in fish, and water is less in the case of sea. Water is not less, the concentration of water is less in the case of sea, but the concentration of water is comparatively high in the fish. So what happens is that water will move from the fish towards the water, fish towards the seawater. Now, if I take this particular fish and put it in the fresh water, where the concentration of water is higher, what happens is that still the water will be moving out, because always from here the water will move out. So excessive loss of water from the fish's body can result in the shrinking of the fish, shrinking in the cytoplasm of the fish, and that can ultimately result in the death of the fish. So due to osmotic reasons, there can be death of the fish. That is extremely critical. That is why freshwater animals cannot live in seawater and vice versa. So here we can see the scenario. The first case number 1, shows a freshwater fish. So in the case of freshwater, what is happening is that the concentration of the medium, that is water, is more. It is having higher amount of water, higher concentration of water, and the concentration of salt is less. So in this particular case, what is happening is that the salt will move out and water will move in. Whereas in the seawater, the opposite story is happening. Water will move out and the sodium chloride will get in, or whatever salt is present, that will move in. As a result of which, if we take a freshwater fish and put it in a seawater, what is happening is that there is excessive loss of water from the body, because now this particular fish is having excess of water present in it. That causes the shrinking of the fish, and this shrinking results in the death of the fish. So in either cases, if we put a freshwater fish in seawater or a seawater fish in freshwater, in either of the scenario, what happens is that the fish will die due to osmotic reasons. So with this, we have come to the conclusion of the second abiotic factor, that is water. Now let us discuss the third abiotic factor, which is known as light. So most of us might have seen in photographs or in reality about the canopy and how the light is coming in. Let us understand what is the significance of light in the case of plants as well as in the case of animals. So usually when we ask this question to ourselves regarding what is the function of light or what is the significance of life in organism, the first and foremost answer that is coming from all of us will be regarding the photosynthesis. Of course, light is extremely essential for photosynthesis, but in addition to these small points, we have to analyze what is the significance of light in plants as well as in animals. So let us go further to this topic. So first is the case of the stratified forest. So if we take a stratified forest, I'll draw a picture for that. If we take a stratified forest, at the lower side we will be having small bushes like the herbs and the shrubs, and then there will be trees, big trees will be there, which is having canopies. So this is the big trees with the canopies. And now what happens is that when the sun's rays are released, what happens is that majority of the rays are captured by these canopies, and very less amount of light enters into the shrubs and the herbs. So now these herbs and the shrubs, they have got adapted to lesser light. Whereas the plants which is present above, the uh, plants which are having canopy, they are adapted to higher light amounts. So we can say that the photoperiodic requirement of the shrubs and the herbs is very low as compared to the photoperiodic requirement of the trees. So many species of the small plants growing in the forest are adapted to photosynthesize optimally under very low light conditions because they are constantly overshadowed by tall canopied trees. The next important point is that many plants are also dependent on the sunlight to meet their photoperiodic requirement. Like some plants may require lesser amount of light, they are known as short day plants. Some others need a higher amount of light, they are known as long day plants. Some need a moderate amount of light for flowering, that is known as day neutral plants. Sometimes what happens is that for the formation of flower, a lower exposure to light is done, that is known as vernalization. So for different plants there is different photoperiodic requirement. So light is extremely important for the flowering of a plant because light stimulates the release of a hormone known as florigen, which is extremely important for flowering. Now let us see another important point, that is the importance of light in the case of animals. So in the case of animals, light is extremely important for carrying out the diurnal as well as seasonal variations. Like how do we decide whether to sleep at night or not? At 11:30 p.m. a normal student sleeps, right? How does he decide whether to sleep or to sit and study? Usually, we sleep at night because there is no sun, and this practice has been followed all the time. So, this practice has been followed because there is a diurnal rhythm that is operating in the body. So, this diurnal rhythm is regulated by light in every organism. Whether to sleep in a particular period of time and to wake up in what period of time, that is determined by light. So, light is extremely important for maintaining the diurnal rhythm. And also there can be seasonal variations in the light intensity, like in the summers there could be higher light intensity and in the winters there could be lesser light intensity. So as a result of which it can cause a variation in the foraging pattern or in the reproductive pattern or in the migratory patterns of different animals. So in the case of animals, four important points are important. It can help in maintaining the diurnal rhythm in animals. Second, it helps in deciding the seasonal activities such as foraging, reproductive and migratory activities in the case of different groups of animals. Next, the availability of light on land. It is very closely related with that of temperature. Why is it closely related with temperature? Is because sun is the common source for both. So since sun is the common source for temperature as well as light, we can say that with increasing temperature, there can be increased light also in the environment. And in the case of the deep sea or the deep oceans, what happens is that the conditions is extremely dark. So what happens is that the different components of light, the spectral quality of the solar radiation is also important, like the UVB rays. The UVB rays, they are extremely important for us, right? But what happens is that when these UVB rays are continuously falling on the skin, it can cause us skin cancer also. So a certain fraction of the UVB rays is extremely important for causing the greenhouse effect, but in excess it can cause cancers as well. So the quality, the spectral quality of the solar radiation is also extremely important, like the radio waves. If the radio waves are coming to earth, it can cause in excess. If it is coming, then what can happen is it can cause large number of defects in humans and other animals. So the spectral quality of light is also extremely important for life. Now if we take the lower organisms, that is algae, we can see that there is a variation in the location of where the algae is present in the aquatic bodies. Like in the shallowest depth, we will be able to see the green algae, whereas at the greatest depth, we can see the red algae. So we can see that the pigmentation in these algae is very closely related with the amount of light it is absorbing. If it needs more light, then it will be present on the surface and it will appear as green. Whereas if it is moving deeper into the ocean, what happens is that it will get very less amount of light and it will appear red. So the color of algae, the pigmentation in algae is closely related with the amount of light it is getting. So light is also extremely important for different group of organisms. Now let us see what is the importance of soil for organisms. Now if we see the types of soil, there are a large number of types of soil which can be seen in different parts of the country, or we can say in different parts of the world as well. Now what is the reason for this variation? The reason can be due to climate, or it can be due to the weathering process. When the rocks are getting converted into soil, the process is known as weathering. So during that time, some climatic conditions or any other extrinsic factors can be responsible for the difference in the texture. And also the development of the soil is also another important factor that determines the quality of soil. Now the characteristics of soil, like the soil composition, grain size, as well as aggregation, they determine the percolation, also known as the water holding capacity of the soils. Percolation means the water is moving through the layers of the soil. This is known as percolation. And water holding capacity means the water is able to hold maximum amount of water. So when the saturation point of soil is high, some soil have high saturation points, like the clay soil, they are having high saturation point. At that particular time, what is happening, all the pores that are present in between two particles, that will be filled with water, and this particular level of soil is important for the growth of plants. Whereas if we take some other type of soil which is having lesser amount of particles, that is lesser greater grain size, greater aggregation, but it is having lesser amount of water capacity, then it is not good for plants. So sometimes it happens that in a vegetation, there has been continuous vegetation for a longer period of time, and as a result of this continuous vegetation, the plants might have drawn maximum water from the soil. So this can result in a permanent wilting point. So if the soil have reached the permanent wilting point, then what happens is that no plants can grow in it, because the water holding capacity of that particular soil becomes very less. So while selecting a particular type of soil for cultivation, we have to ensure that it is having a high level of saturation, rather than having a permanent wilting point, because wilting point is unfavorable for cultivation. Now, there are some factors such as the pH. Also, we have factors like the mineral composition, the topography. All these things are extremely important for determining the vegetation in a particular area. Now, the amount of vegetation or the types of vegetation that is present in an area, that will reflect on the type of animals that are ultimately present. So the pH, mineral composition and the topography, they help in determining the types of plants which are present in that particular area, and the types of plants which are present in that particular area reflects on the types of animals that are present in that particular habitat. So soil is extremely important not only for plants but also for the animals who depends on the plants. Similarly, in the aquatic environment also soil is important. Now we may not think about this, right? But there are some organisms like the benthic animals like the prawns and worms and snails which live in the lower seabeds. So in the lower seabed also soil is important. So the quality and the quantity of soil is important for the growth and sustenance of these benthic animals which are living in these uh, waterbed. So this brings us to the end of the discussion of the major abiotic factors. We have discussed about soil, light, water and temperature. So with this we complete the theory of today's lecture. Now let us understand how much we have learned so far in the form of some questions. So if you have an OMR, you can keep it aside and you can do this as a self-assessment test. So this is your self-assessment test. So you can use your OMR sheet and using that mark the answers and ultimately count the score. After every question I will be saying the answer for that question, so you can correct according to that and ultimately count your score and comment your score in the comment section below. And if you have understood the lecture, please do not forget to like this lecture. So let's start with question number 1. Father of Indian ecology is. So this is a question from the scientist introduction part before the chapter. So that particular part introduces us to a scientist known as Ramdevo Mishra. So Ramdevo Mishra is known as the father of Indian ecology. So the answer for this question should be option 3 should be the answer. Let us move on to the second question. Ecology describes. Option number 1, interaction between living organisms only. Option 2, interaction between members of a single species only. Option 3, interactions of organisms among themselves as well as their surrounding abiotic components. And option number 4, intra-specific competitions only. So if you could recall the basic definition of ecology, you can answer this question. I hope this much time was enough for answering. The option should be 3. So for this particular question also the option is 3. Let us move on to the next question. Ecology is basically concerned with how many basic levels of organization? 3, 2, 4 and 8. So how many basic levels is asked? If you could recollect, we have studied that we have organisms, population, next one was community and the last one was biome. So we are having 4 levels of organization. So again the answer is 3. Moving to the fourth question, factors which play significant role in the formation of major biomes are. We have studied about the factors which is responsible for the formation of landscapes, where we have discussed about the tilting of the earth and also about the revolution that resulted in the annual variation in the temperature, and then we have discussed about the annual variation of precipitation. So both temperature and precipitation together is important for the formation of major biomes. So the answer for this question should be option number 2. Let us move on to question number 5. Permafrost condition is a characteristic feature of. So here we can see the word frost. So based on that we can easily answer the question. Option 1 is hot desert biome. It is wrong. Cold desert biome. That is correct. Savanna biome. No. Chaparral biome. No. So the answer should be option number 2. Moving on to the next question. Which of the following is the most ecologically relevant factor? The most ecologically relevant factor is going to be temperature, basic NCRT statement. So the answer is option number 2. Moving to the next question. Mango, tuna fish, snow leopards are. So as I have told, mango is seen in the tropical countries and it cannot be seen in the temperate countries. Similarly, snow leopards and tuna fish, they are restricted to a certain regions only and they are not present in all the climatic conditions. So we can say that they are eurythermal organisms. So the better option should be option number 3. Moving on to the next question, find out the correct match with respect to the salinity in parts per thousand. So the first option states inland water is having greater than or equal to 5. Well, this option is going to be incorrect because it should be less than 5. Seawater 60 to 65 again is going to be incorrect because it should be 30 to 35. Hypersaline lagoons, it should be LA. Lagoons greater than 100, yes, that is correct. Freshwater should be less than 3, so the answer should be option number 3. Moving on with the next question, this is a previous year question. Niche is all the biological factors in the organism's environment, the physical space where an organism lives, that is known as the habitat, functional role played by the organism where it lives, yes, that is known as niche. So the answer for this question should be option 3. Moving on with the final question, an association of individuals of different species living in the same habitat and having functional interactions is. So here they are asking for an association. It is an association of individuals and they are belonging to different species. They are living in the same habitat and they are having functional interactions. So it should be biotic community. Option 3 should be the answer. So this was again a question from AIPMT 2015. So this particular section of abiotic factors and physiological ecology had 2 questions in the past 10 years. So do not leave this section, just go through the topics and it's an easy topic as well. So with this we conclude the question discussion and also the theory of our first lecture. In the next lecture we'll be discussing about the responses to abiotic factors and also about adaptations. So see you again in the next lecture. Thanks for watching and please do not forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel so that you do not miss out any important updates regarding the upcoming lectures. Thanks once again.